Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I want you to visualize a very specific scenario, one that might feel uncomfortably familiar.
Oh, man. I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, you probably do. So, you are sitting at your kitchen table. It's late at night, the house is completely quiet, and, the pale blue glow of a laptop screen is illuminating your face.
Right. And you're staring at an Excel file or something.
Precisely. You are staring at a spreadsheet that is completely, stubbornly, painfully blank. I mean, you have the engine revving, you went through all those grueling seminary classes.
The cross-cultural training is finished.
Yeah, your bags are mentally packed for a foreign field, but, and here's the kicker, you are staring at a bank account that will not budge. The ledger is just empty.
Month after month.
Month after month, yeah. Zero new recurring donors. And in the quiet of that moment, this creeping, terrifying thought enters your mind, right? Does a lack of funding mean God has closed the door on my vocation?
Like, is that empty ledger a divine no?
Right. Is it a no?
That specific scenario at the kitchen table, I mean, that is the nightmare of almost every prospective missionary. It strikes at the very core of their assurance.
It really does.
When a candidate sees $0 coming in, they start questioning everything. Their own sanity, their calling, their understanding of providence.
They wonder if they just misread the signals from day one.
Yeah, they start wondering if they made it all up.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive.
Let's lay it out. We are looking at a stack of missiological essays and theological commentaries regarding this excruciating wait for missionary financial support.
And we are moving completely away from the pragmatic modern view of fundraising here.
Right, because the modern world treats support raising as this administrative annoyance, right? A necessary evil.
Like a hurdle you just have to jump over before the real work begins.
Yeah, but instead we are looking at a highly specific thesis proposed by these sources. We are examining how financial delays are an active, highly integrated element of God's sovereign providence.
The waiting room is actually designed to sanctify the worker and mobilize the church.
So the sources are asking us to completely flip our perspective.
Completely. Because, I mean, most candidates view support raising as an obstacle blocking the actual ministry, right?
Yeah, that's the standard view.
But the research we are unpacking today argues the total opposite. The support raising process is the opening act of the ministry itself. The delay is not a glitch in the system.
It's a feature of the design.
Right.
It's a feature.
To grasp the weight of this, we need to look at the sheer mathematical reality of modern missions right now in the year 2026. The statistics from our sources paint a picture that is, well, frankly, it's daunting.
Let's hear the numbers.
Okay, the average annual cost to fully support a single North American missionary unit is hovering around $83,000.
Okay, that's already a lot.
But wait, if you are looking at specialized confessional agencies that require a robust, structured operational framework, that number reaches up to $155,000 per family annually. Wow. $155,000. Those numbers create a massive psychological wall for a candidate.
That's staggering.
I mean, you graduate from your training program, you're handed a manual, and you are told to go find $155,000 a year in recurring donations before you can even buy a plane ticket.
Yeah, and then you contrast those structural requirements with another statistic from the research, and this is the one that really hits hard.
Brace yourself for this one.
Right. North American evangelicals designate a microscopic $107 out of every $100,000 they earn toward unreached people groups.
$107 out of $100,000.
Yeah. Put that required $155,000 next to that $107 reality, and the collision is violent.
It creates an intense psychological crisis for the candidate on the ground.
How could it not?
Exactly. When the ledger is empty month after month, the immediate temptation is to doubt the calling. They look at the math, they look at the giving trends, and they ask if their inability to secure funding is a divine sign of rejection.
They think the door is slammed shut.
Right. But to answer these anxieties, the sources argue we have to step away from modern individualistic panic. We have to look at the perspective found in Chapter 5 of the Westminster Confession of Faith,
which asserts that God, the great creator in all things, governs all actions and things, from the greatest even to the least, by his most wise and holy providence.
Meaning, the empty ledger is not an accident.
It's not a mathematical error on a cosmic scale.
No. A lack of funds is not a cosmic oversight. God is not checking a heavenly bank account and realizing he came up short on resources. you know.
Right, he's not stressed about inflation.
Financial provision, or the explicit delay of it, is a deliberate decree.
And that flies directly in the face of our modern obsession with instant gratification. I mean, we live in a culture where if you order something online and it takes more than 2 days to arrive, you assume the supply chain is completely broken.
Oh, absolutely. We want it yesterday.
And we apply that exact same logic to ministry. The agonizingly slow pace of support raising feels like a personal failure. But historically, waiting was considered a standard, expected phase of spiritual preparation.
But today, the delay feels punitive. A candidate might spend years doing itinerary preaching.
Sleeping on terrible air mattresses.
Yeah, sleeping on air mattresses, speaking at Wednesday night potlucks in church basements, and realizing that years of this grueling schedule are yielding minimal financial results.
The crisis of assurance that follows has got to be crushing.
It is. They feel they're doing everything right, their theology is sound, their zeal is real, yet the door remains locked.
Okay, let's unpack this. I hear what you were saying about trusting Providence, but think about it like a startup business. If a tech startup has zero funding, venture capitalists look at that operation and conclude the market has rejected the product. The demand simply isn't there.
Sure, that's the business world.
So why shouldn't a missionary look at a total lack of funds and assume it is God giving them a market rejection? Why shouldn't they assume the lack of capital means the whole idea was flawed from the start?
What's fascinating here is how easily we map secular corporate mechanics onto the kingdom of God. The pragmatic error assumes that God operates like a venture capitalist, sitting in a boardroom, waiting to see if human donors will behave and validate the project.
Like he's waiting for seed funding.
Right. But God is not a helpless observer waiting for market forces to align. He rules the finances. He does not need the donor's money. The cattle on 1,000 hills belong to him.
He could fund it in a second if he wanted to.
Precisely. He uses the delay for a specific educational purpose. If the funds are withheld, it is because the sovereign Lord of the harvest intends to accomplish something in the waiting that could not be accomplished in the going.
Okay, that takes an enormous amount of pressure off the candidate's salesmanship. Establishing that God controls the timeline naturally leads us to ask how God has structurally designed the support system in the first place.
Which is a great question.
Right. Why build a system that requires human donors at all? If God owns everything, why orchestrate this incredibly stressful mechanism where a missionary has to ask regular people for money?
To understand that, this pushes us right into the ancient texts to figure out the mechanics of how this is supposed to work.
And the sources take us into the book of Romans, right?
Yeah, specifically Romans 10, verses 13 through 15. The Apostle Paul lays out an unbroken logical chain of redemptive proclamation.
Let's go through that chain.
He writes that salvation requires faith, faith requires hearing, hearing requires a preacher, and preaching requires a sender.
We really need to look at the historical context of that letter to grasp the weight of what Paul is saying. The sources point out that Paul wrote this from Corinth, around AD 57.
He had finished his pioneer work in the East.
Yeah, and he was looking at the western frontier, specifically Spain, and he was writing to the Roman house churches.
Now, those Roman house churches were incredibly fractured at that moment in history. They were dealing with intense ethnic disputes between Jewish and Gentile believers trying to handle life in post-Claudius Rome.
Because the Jewish believers had been expelled, right?
Yes, they'd been expelled, they came back, and the cultural tension in those house churches was massive. Paul's objective was not just to write a theological textbook for them to study.
He wasn't just giving a lecture.
No, he was trying to turn those divided, squabbling house churches into a unified financial sending base for his mission to Spain. In the ancient world, missionary travel required extensive patronal support, letters of commendation, and actual physical provisions to survive the journey.
So he is basically telling them to stop arguing over local ethnic divisions and look at the map. He is calling them to open their treasuries and unite around a massive cross-cultural financial endeavor.
Which brings us back to that logical chain in Romans 10. Paul breaks down the absolute necessity of commissioning. He asks, how shall they preach unless they are sent?
The Greek distinction noted in the source text here is incredible.
Oh, I love this part.
There's the word pimpo, which means to send in a general, informal sense. But Paul uses the word apostello, which means to commission with formal, legal, and representative authority.
That is the difference between telling your kid to go play outside and an ambassador being dispatched by a head of state with the full backing of a national government.
That's a huge difference.
Furthermore, the verb is in the passive voice. The passive voice implies that God is the primary sender, but he operates entirely through the secondary, visible agency of the local church session.
So the preacher does not authorize himself.
Never. He is authorized, equipped, and launched by the covenant community.
I love the aesthetic glory mentioned in verse 15, referencing Isaiah 52. How beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news.
It's a great image.
And that contrasts so sharply with the modern discomfort we have around asking for money. We feel like beggars, apologizing for passing the hat.
We feel awkward.
Yeah, but Isaiah was talking about a messenger running over the mountains, bringing news to a war-weary people that they're exiles over. The weight of that message is what makes the messenger beautiful, not their financial independence. The dust-covered, calloused feet are gorgeous because they carry the news of victory.
That reorients the whole posture of the missionary. You are not a solicitor asking for a handout. You are a royal herald carrying the decrees of a king.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the digital age we live in. In 2026, anyone with a smartphone can set up a GoFundMe page, shoot a compelling video, bypass their elders completely, and raise capital directly from the crowd.
It happens all the time.
If the goal is just getting to the field to preach, why is utilizing independent online crowdfunding considered by these authors to be a sin of independentism?
Because it short-circuits that divine chain of logic we just talked about. A missionary cannot self-commission. Bypassing the church might get you funded faster, sure, but it deprives the candidate of vital spiritual protection.
It leaves them exposed.
Yes, it isolates them from ecclesiastical accountability. The research shows that this kind of isolation almost always leads to theological drift when the candidate hits the pressures of the foreign field.
And the sources go further. They describe this independent model as covenantal robbery.
Covenantal robbery. Let's break that down.
Yeah, because that is a very heavy accusation against a well-meaning person just trying to fund their mission trip, right?
It is heavy, but the authors argue it is structurally accurate. Look at it this way. When churches consume all their resources locally on entertainment-driven models,
Fancy light shows and coffee bars.
yeah, and let their missionaries starve on the fundraising trail or force them to crowdfund outside the church body, the church is robbing the covenant community of its mandate to participate in global missions.
Oh, I see.
The local church is supposed to be the authorized sender. When a candidate bypasses them, they are robbing the church of their duty and privilege to act as the sender.
So if bypassing the church is considered covenantal robbery, and the candidate is not allowed to just set up a digital tip jar, this waiting period becomes locked in. It is inevitable.
You can't fast forward it.
But the sources argue this time must not be viewed as wasted time. God is executing a very specific curriculum in the waiting room.
The waiting room is a spiritual laboratory. The sources detail 5 distinct pedagogical dimensions of the support-raising delay.
Let's run through those 5 dimensions.
Number 1 is the mortification of pride by forcing total reliance on God.
That's a big one.
Massive. Most North American candidates carry a subtle virus of self-sufficiency. They trust in their seminary education, their charismatic personality, their administrative competence.
They think they can logic their way into a fully funded account, like I have a great pitch deck, so I'll get the money.
Right, but the support-raising trail places them in a position of complete vulnerability. They are forced to depend on the voluntary, sacrificial giving of others. It strips away the illusion of financial autonomy and forces them to pray for their daily bread with raw sincerity.
Their ego has to die before they get on the plane.
Spot on. Then you have the second dimension, ecclesiastical interconnection. This destroys the Lone Ranger anomaly.
Right, because the independent, isolated missionary is a dangerous thing.
Exactly. When support stalls, candidates are forced out of their bubbles. They have to travel. They have to sit down with a vast, diverse network of local churches. This builds a love for the universal body, not just their home congregation.
Which leads right into the third dimension, homiletical refinement. They are turning those living room pitches into mini-sermons.
Every dessert fellowship, every Wednesday night presentation is a theological test. The candidate has to explain complex realities and the raw mechanics of the gospel clearly and concisely to incredibly diverse audiences.
Just visualize the grueling reality of that process. One night, You are sitting in a boardroom with a conservative Presbyterian session, facing intense theological scrutiny regarding your sacramental views.
They'll grow you.
Oh, they absolutely
Yeah.
will. Then the next night, you are standing in front of an independent Baptist congregation trying to match their energetic demands and explain your evangelism strategy.
It's a totally different vibe.
And over the weekend, you are in a rustic, rural parish answering very practical questions from farmers about how you will actually survive in a foreign climate. If you cannot translate your vision into pastoral language across those different environments, you are in trouble.
And that leads to the fourth dimension. The delay forces character forging. It kills the romanticized Messiah complex.
Messiah complex.
Yeah, so many young candidates think they're going to show up, plant a flag, and thousands will convert immediately.
Hmm.
But the foreign field is actually characterized by grinding spiritual warfare, intense isolation, and very slow, seemingly invisible ministerial fruit.
So what does this all mean for you? It sounds like a pilot in a flight simulator.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you crash the simulator during a dessert fellowship in a comfortable living room because someone asked a tough theological question or declined to support you financially, you are absolutely not ready to fly into a hurricane on the foreign field.
The fundraising trail is the simulator where your spiritual muscles, long-suffering, administrative discipline, patience, and boldness are exercised before the real turbulence hits.
That makes so much sense.
If a candidate lacks the emotional and spiritual stamina to handle financial rejection from a local congregation in their homeland, they will absolutely collapse under the extreme pressures of the unreached field.
And while all of this character forging is happening, we hit the fifth dimension. The physical act of asking for money is assembling an army of prayer partners.
This raises an important question about how prayer partners are actually formed, right? Because it is a fatal error to believe fundraising is just about securing capital.
Right, because donors who only give financially, perhaps through an anonymous online link, often forget the missionary entirely.
Out of sight, out of mind.
But the physical, humbling act of asking for help builds a relational connection. A donor who has looked the candidate in the eye, heard the tremor of passion in their voice, and committed to sacrificial giving is far more likely to wage active spiritual warfare on their behalf through persistent prayer.
The grueling months spent building a support team construct the spiritual fortress the missionary will desperately need later.
Okay, so once that missionary is refined in the simulator, once their pride is mortified and that prayer base is built, a highly practical hurdle remains.
The budget.
Yes. They still have to sit down with a church session and justify the massive financial target they are required to raise. We need to talk about confessional stewardship and those massive budgets we mentioned earlier.
Because it is very easy to look at a $155,000 budget and balk.
Oh, totally. People see that and think, are they buying a yacht?
Right. But a professional sending agency derives these policies from decades of hard-won historical experience. A missionary budget is a comprehensive operational framework made of distinct structural necessities.
Let's break down the realities of that budget using the 5 structural buckets outlined in the source. First up is direct living and housing.
This is the baseline needed to secure safe, hygienic housing, purchase nutritious food, and maintain a dignified standard of living adjusted for localized inflation and the host city's economic realities.
You can't preach if you're starving or sick from bad water.
Exactly. Then you have the second bucket, comprehensive health and life insurance. Physical bodies break down.
Especially in new environments.
Missionaries are routinely exposed to tropical pathogens, unsanitary water supplies, and hazardous political conditions. High-quality international insurance ensures that a sudden medical emergency or unnecessary medical evacuation does not bankrupt the mission entirely or force a permanent, devastating evacuation.
The sources also point out bucket number 3, civil and federal taxation. Scripture commands believers to be subject to governing authorities in Romans 13.
You don't just stop paying taxes because you moved overseas.
Right. Missionaries remain citizens of their home countries and must pay federal taxes, state taxes, and self-employment contributions. Ignoring this violates civil law and undermines their witness.
The fourth bucket is direct ministry and administrative program costs. This is the operational capital. Funding for theological books, Bibles in local dialects, language tutors, domestic travel within the host country.
It adds up fast.
It does. And this also covers the administrative overhead of the sending agency, the parachurch infrastructure providing logistical oversight, psychological counseling, and crisis management.
Which you absolutely need. And finally, bucket 5, retirement and emergency stewardship. A faithful missionary is not a short-term mercenary.
They are in it for the long haul.
So a portion of the budget is designated for retirement savings and emergency contingency reserves to ensure they finish their race with dignity.
Now, we have to confront the pragmatic fallacy here, the constant debate between surviving versus thriving.
Oh, you hear this objection from candidates all the time.
All the time. They say, I am going to a developing nation. The average local pastor survives on $300 a month. I can easily live on that. Asking for anything more is living in luxury.
And it sounds highly spiritual, right? It sounds like the ultimate sacrifice.
It sounds spiritual, but it is grounded in a deep-seated naivety. Ponder the long-term damage caused by underfunded missionaries.
It's a disaster waiting to happen.
If you have no emergency reserves, what happens when your child gets sick with a tropical fever? You become a massive financial liability to the very impoverished local churches you were trying to assist, or you return home completely broken, cynical, and destitute.
Visualize the daily reality of a missionary trying to survive on that $300 a month. They are constantly paralyzed by financial anxiety. They are unable to afford basic dental care for their children.
They can't even buy gasoline for the ministry vehicle to visit a remote village where they are supposed to be preaching.
And all of that anxiety acts as a tax on their cognitive energy. You cannot pour your mind into translating the word or counseling a local believer if you are constantly panicked about how to pay for your next meal.
Okay, let's unpack this from the donor side. A skeptic in the pews might look at a $155,000 budget and argue the missionary is living like a corporate CEO on the donor's dime. How do we draw the line between wise confessional stewardship and just padding an expense account?
Well, the line is drawn by understanding the budget is not a personal salary. It is an operational framework. The missionary is not pocketing that money to build a massive stock portfolio.
They aren't getting rich off this.
No, they're utilizing it to sustain a global operation in a hostile environment.
We look at 1 Timothy 5:18, where Paul states that the laborer deserves his wages. Adequate funding grants the physical and cognitive freedom to pour one's life unreservedly into the harvest. It protects against burnout and premature departure.
So this robust budget is structurally sound. It is entirely justified.
Right.
But what happens when a willing church simply lacks the funds? I mean, the session agrees with the theology, they love the candidate, the budget makes sense, but the local church's ledger is also empty. The resources are simply absent.
It happens more often than you'd think.
To handle that, we must look to an ancient precedent for handling delayed or absent resources. The sources point us to the Philippian model of contentment and covenantal partnership.
Let's turn to Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 20. The context here is vital for understanding the mechanics of giving. Paul is writing from a Roman prison to a church in Philippi, which was a Roman colony in Macedonia.
This is a church birthed in absolute suffering. Acts 16 gives us the history. We have Lydia, the slave girl, Paul being beaten and thrown into a dark cell, the earthquake, the terrified jailers.
It was a traumatic start.
Very. The Philippian believers knew exactly what hardship and persecution looked like.
They certainly did. And Paul notes in his letter that their concern for him had blossomed again. They had previously lacked the opportunity to give, perhaps due to distance, severe poverty, or a lack of safe couriers, but now they had finally sent a financial gift via Epaphroditus.
In analyzing Paul's response to this gift, the sources make a sharp distinction between Paul's Christ-taught sufficiency and pagan Stoic self-mastery.
This is a crucial distinction. In the ancient Roman world, the Stoic ideal was complete, arrogant independence from circumstances and people.
Like a proud detachment from needing anyone at all.
Yes, but Paul is not an isolated, detached sage trying to prove his toughness. He actually welcomes the financial help. He says he has learned to be content in whatever situation, whether facing plenty or hunger.
But his stability comes from Christ strengthening him, not from a stubborn refusal to accept aid from his friends.
Exactly. He acknowledges that it was kind of them to share in his trouble.
And he uses this accounting language, which is fascinating when you think about our modern discomfort with money in the church.
He says he does not seek the gift itself, but the spiritual fruit that increases to the donor's account.
By using that accounting language before God, he frames financial giving as a fragrant offering and a sacrifice pleasing to God. He echoes Old Testament sacrificial imagery.
The money becomes an act of devotion placed on an altar.
Think about what that does to the mindset of fundraising. If you treat support raising as an invitation to koinonia, this deep fellowship in affliction, it completely removes the shame of asking.
It stops being a beggar asking for a handout. It becomes an offer for the donor to participate in eternal obedience.
Contrast the image of a desperate beggar with the image of a royal herald. A beggar on the street offers no gospel labor, no doctrine, no church planting, and no eternal fruit. They are just asking for survival.
But a missionary operating under church oversight offers the saints a chance to share in the very work of Christ among the nations.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In the secular charity world, or even the ancient patronal culture, you give money to get your name on a hospital wing or to buy influence and honor over an organization.
The donor gains leverage over the receiver.
Right. But Paul is actively resisting that dynamic. By telling them he has learned contentment without them, he is essentially saying, I need your money to survive this prison, but your money doesn't buy me. I am not your client.
That's a bold thing to say to the people funding you.
So how does a modern missionary maintain that posture without sounding arrogant or ungrateful to a major donor?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the focus must always remain vertical. The missionary must help the donor view the money as an act of worship directed to God rather than a horizontal transaction with the missionary.
That shifts the whole dynamic.
It does. When the gift is framed as a fragrant sacrifice pleasing to God, the donor cannot boast of buying influence over the mission, and the receiver does not bear the crushing shame of indebtedness. Both the pride of the donor and the shame of the receiver are dismantled at the altar of worship.
Trusting in God's provision through the church is clearly the standard model. It is the ideal. But what happens when that traditional support model completely stalls out?
You mean when the door just stays shut?
Yeah. You have submitted to the process, your pride is dead, you have pitched the vision across a dozen states, but the ledger remains blank. Providence might be pointing to an entirely different access strategy.
This brings us to the necessary steps of redirection and the bivocational vanguard. When the doors of traditional full-time support remain stubbornly shut for years, the candidate must not plunge into despair or assume they were delusional about their desire to serve.
They shouldn't just give up.
No, they must submit to their local session for a rigorous audit.
An audit of their character and calling. Laying the financial ledger on the table and asking their elders to look closely. Is there a flaw in my presentation? Is there a character issue I am blind to? Or is God simply closing this specific door regarding traditional funding?
If the elders discern that the providential closed door indicates a need for redirection, the candidate must humbly submit to that reality. And that redirection often leads to exploring bivocational missions, historically known as tent making.
We look at the biblical precedent for this in Acts 18, verse 3. Paul arrives in Corinth, a massive commercial hub, and works as a tent maker alongside Aquila and Priscilla to fund his own ministry.
Tent making is not a modern plan B for missionaries who failed at fundraising. It is a venerable strategic vanguard.
Let's talk about the reality of the map in 2026. The 1040 window, which contains the bulk of the unreached people groups on Earth, is dominated by Islamic, totalitarian, or communist regimes.
These nations outright deny religious visas entirely.
You cannot show up at the border of a closed country, hand them your passport, and say, I am a full-time, fully funded religious worker, please let me in.
They will put you on the next flight home, or worse. In these closed contexts, entering with a secular profession is the only viable pathway to gain access.
So secular professions like teaching English as a second language, computer engineering, small business consulting, or healthcare grant natural, unforced relationships with local citizens.
It completely bypasses the immediate hostility a traditional religious worker would face.
Imagine a computer engineer in a closed country. They wake up, they go to the office, they work alongside locals, they solve complex software problems together, they eat lunch together in the cafeteria.
They are just living normal life with them.
Right. They do not have to hide their identity in fear, sneaking around in the dark, trying to hold secret meetings. Their everyday marketplace interactions provide daily, organic avenues to proclaim their faith through natural conversations.
A hostile government might block a pastor, but they will gladly open their borders for a structural engineer or a medical specialist. God's delays in funding often force us into more effective, localized strategies that we would have ignored if our bank accounts had been full from the start.
So what does this all mean? Is taking a secular job in a hostile nation a reluctant compromise of the mission because the fundraising failed? Or is it basically a spiritual Trojan horse designed to get past hostile border control?
I think the Trojan horse analogy is highly accurate. Tent making is a dynamic key that unlocks doors traditional mission structures cannot even touch. The closed door on the spreadsheet forces the candidate to pick up the very key that will unlock the border of a hostile nation.
Bringing this entire discussion together, whether the path leads to a fully funded deployment where you are supported by a network of churches, or a bivocational endeavor where you are working as an engineer in a closed country, the candidate must find peace in the overarching decree of God.
The ultimate antidote to the anxiety of the support-raising crucible is resting in the sovereign decree of the Lord of the harvest.
If you are stalled on the support-raising trail right now, do not view the waiting room as a failure. It is not an administrative penalty box. It is the opening movement of your deployment.
Rest in the God who declares in Isaiah 46, verse 10, "My counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose." The God who ordained your final destination has also ordained the exact, agonizing, and beautiful process to get you there.
We started today talking about sitting at a kitchen table, staring at a blank spreadsheet, wondering if God is ignoring your calling. But consider this final thought as we close out this deep dive. If God is using this painful, empty ledger to carefully prepare and refine you for the mission field, mortifying your pride, building your endurance, assembling your prayer team, how might He be using this exact same delay to simultaneously prepare the hearts of the unreached people on the other side of the world for the very moment you finally arrive?